Welcome to Rising Up for Justice, a special weekly series presented by Rising Up with Sonali, an independently produced subscriber-supported program syndicated to radio stations, free speech TV, and podcast platforms. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar, host and executive producer. Our nation and our world is overrun by billionaires and bigots, but they are few and we are many. On this series, exclusive to subscribers of Rising Up with Sonali and viewers of Free Speech TV, we'll hear from organizers in the movements for social justice and dig into the nuts and bolts of values, strategies, tactics, narratives, and building power. This week, Angela Mooney Darcy, Executive Director and founder of the Sacred Places Institute for Indigenous Peoples, joins us. Angela is from the Hashaman Nation, the native nation whose traditional territories include the area known as Orange County, California. She's worked with Native nations, Indigenous peoples, grassroots and nonprofit organizations, artists, educators, and institutions on environmental and cultural justice issues for over 25 years. It's a pleasure to have you on the program, Angela.
Thank you so much for having me. I started listening to your show when I was in law school 25 years ago. So I
Oh
was
my
very,
goodness.
very excited to get your message.
Well, we've both been at it for a long time, and I'm glad our paths have intersected. Tell me about the Sacred Places Institute for Indigenous Peoples. How do you summarize the work that your organization does? What is your main organizational goal?
Well, our mission is to build the capacity of Native nations and Indigenous peoples to protect sacred lands, waters, and cultures. And our goal is to achieve paradigm shifts to protect Indigenous peoples so that our peoples and cultures can exist for all time. And for us, that very much is about protecting all of our human and non-human relatives, and the earth herself, because Indigenous peoples' lifeways and relationships with the earth and with all of our relatives around the world is what keeps the world in balance. And as you indicate in your introduction, right now we are a world very much out of balance. So from our perspective, supporting Indigenous peoples in this way and that paradigm shift actually protects the world for everyone.
When we think about how such a mind shift can happen, because it seems as though your organization really is focused on cultural change, specifically, in addition to actual policy shifting, what are the challenges that your organization faces? I imagine that lack of information is a big part of it. Lack of visibility in mainstream American society is a big part of it.
Yeah, if I were to, the short answer to that question is, settler colonialism, institutional racism, and, anti-indigeneity and anti-Blackness, originating in the doctrine of discovery and the papal bulls many centuries ago. I think a deeper answer of that question is, you spoke to it a bit, erasure, for one. Another thing is, I find it's often challenging for people whose worldview is limited to within the time frame of colonialism, to really be hopeful about humanity and what's possible in the world. After the first Trump election, the first day or two after that election, people asked me, what I was doing to cope or for myself. And I said, not even jokingly, but in all seriousness, that I was focusing all of my attention on 1,000 years ago and 1,000 years from now, and not the 2,000 years in between. And I let myself do that for a weekend because I needed to remind myself that as humanity and as this planet, even outside of humanity, it has existed for a very, very long time. And settler colonialism in this institution, though it seems insurmountable, is actually very, very new and very small in the span of the existence of the earth and our time on it. And I think that's another thing that working with and uplifting and amplifying and centering Indigenous peoples and voices can do is bring hope back into the conversation. We are, privileged. I'm very privileged. I lived in unceded Tongva homelands in what's now known as Venice, California. I promise myself every time I do any kind of interview, I mention the fact that, to my knowledge, there are only two Tongva people who are still title holders to land in what's now Venice. And I
Only
think that's an
two.
important, sorry.
Wow. Only two?
Yeah,
That's.
as far as I'm aware. I mean, I haven't
Mm.
done like a, substantive study or anything, so this is just anecdotal. But I think it's important to raise these kind of pieces of information because in places like Orange County, which is my ancestral homeland, and Los Angeles, which is Tongva homeland, um, these areas are so well known to the general public, it's almost incomprehensible for most folks to think of them as still being indigenous lands. What I was saying is I'm very privileged in that I live, within 2 hours of places where I can trace my lineage back to from before colonization. And even though all of us on this planet are indigenous to somewhere, I recognize what a deep privilege and rarity it is that I can do that. And so I feel, an obligation in being someone who has such a rare privilege to be able to have those links still intact, um, to focus on narratives that bring hope and encourage other people to think outside of the current regime and even the current system of settler colonialism, because I know we have done better as humanity and we can do better as humanity again.
How does your organization go about fulfilling its goal and its mission? What are the steps, that some concrete things that you're working on right now that you want people to know about at the Sacred Places Institute for Indigenous Peoples?
So we have several programs and we use a wide variety of tactics. Our mission statement is quite expansive, and that's intentional because for Indigenous peoples, these concepts are all related, not disaggregated and siloed the way that things often are in Western society. So we use direct action, Indigenous rooted research, justice, law and policy advocacy, narrative strategy via filmmaking in our media program, leadership development, coalition building, a variety of tactics to change policy and get towards that paradigm shift. Our programs include our Ocean Protectors program, our Indigenous Waters program, our Indigenous Media program, our Indigenous Just Transitions program, and our Sacred Ecologies program. So, with all of these, the goals are both to uh, support Indigenous nations and peoples in what their environmental justice and climate justice goals are in these different areas, and then also to do what we can to support um, reconnection and access. Because for a lot of Indigenous peoples, our access has been cut off from our homelands for many centuries. So, at the heart of all of these different programs, what really ties it all together is a fundamental commitment to land and water rematriation, meaning land back and land return to the original stewards of these lands and waters.
In recent years, there have been moves nationally around land back. It's, just even the kind of cultural shift around adopting this concept of returning the land to its original stewards, to the people who have known how to live with it and love it and treat it with the respect it deserves, has finally been gaining steam. What are some victories that you can point to, or efforts that are ongoing right now around that? Because that seems to be such a fundamental aspect of undoing settler colonialism, because that was basically the result of wars fought over land. This idea of property and individuals being able to own property. How far has the land back movement come along?
I mean, there have been tremendous gains. locally at the state level, nationally, though there are efforts, underway as we speak, of course, to roll those back and block those efforts, and internationally to center land back as well. So, I mean, it's been something to name, that as a particular concept gained popularity a few years ago, but has been something that Indigenous peoples all over the world have always been fighting for since the very beginning, since those first colonizers stepped foot on these shores. Locally, I can say that I'm on the board of the Ahashamam Land Conservancy, and we did receive the first land back ever in what's known as Orange County, California, at Bolsa Chica a few years ago. And that's been amazing and phenomenal, and also a real challenge, as one might imagine, in the heart of Orange County, doing that kind of work. In Los Angeles, you have several instances of Gabrielino Tongva land back and partnerships around land stewardship that are happening throughout the state of California. During the pandemic, Governor Newsom issued a tribal lands administrative policy in which he committed to that, in which he stated that it was the administration's policy to, prioritize land return for land that it had deemed surplus or excess. And in the 30 by 30 initiative as well, it names land back as a priority. So one of our recent success stories is in Los Angeles County when LA County formed the Just Transition Task Force. Thanks to our advocacy, there was a requirement that there be space for representatives from each of the Native nations whose ancestral territory is covered by LA County on the task force. And as a result of that, when the final report came out, one of the exciting things was that when oil wells are abandoned and then the land is rehabilitated, those tribes now have first right of purchase or first right of refusal for the land. So that's not like completely land back, but it's certainly a step in the right direction. And it's an important intervention because these conversations around ending extractive industries and what a just transition looks like are going to continue, and making sure that Indigenous voices are not just at the table, but that land back as a central component of these just transitions is really critical and something that we're excited to be involved with.
You mentioned Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, who has signed legislation that's been supportive. But I'm wondering if you can point out places where he could do better, given that Sacred Places Institute for Indigenous Peoples is very much concerned with climate change, and Newsom has made nods towards being somebody who's good on climate change, but still seems to have not gone far enough. What would you want Newsom to do better?
Oh, there are so many things I would want Newsom to do better.
All right, I was being very, very modest in my question. Then, how could he? How could you push him to be so much better?
One that I want to uplift that is near and dear to me as a person from a coastal nation is protecting the California Coastal Act and the important work of the California Coastal Commission. Both Newsom and Trump have taken aim at the Coastal Commission and the Coastal Act recently, and that is just absurd and appalling and painful to me, because our coast it's sacred, it's critical, it's essential, and it's really critical to have entities in place who are guided by motives that are greater than profit or personal gain. In terms of the climate justice work, well, in terms of all the work, I think that a better job can be done in acknowledging and supporting the rights and the sovereignty and the self-determination of the nearly a third of California Native nations that are not federally recognized. California is very unique in that there are over 150 sovereign Native nations in California. About a third of us are not federally recognized, and the state actually does a pretty good job of assuring that the sovereignty of all these tribes are respected and the raising up the importance of government to government consultation with all of these nations. But I think in practice, this current administration could do a lot better job in terms of making sure that, all of those non-federally recognized Native nations have an equal seat at all of
And by
these.
administration, you mean the federal administration could do a better
Oh, I
job?
mean the state
The
and the
state
federal.
administration. Okay,
Yeah.
so it's respecting the sovereignty, but isn't doing enough to help these nations get federal recognition?
No, it's not. It's not about helping with federal recognition. It's just more in practice. For instance, when Governor Newsom issued the widely acclaimed and publicized apology to California Native Americans and an acknowledgement that the state's role in the attempted genocide of our people, there were not representatives from non-federally recognized tribes invited to that announcement. That's a real problem. um, but there was effort to include non-recognized tribes on the Truth and Healing Council, but the state can do better in making sure that, because when the state, and its agencies was calling for the genocide of California Native Americans, they weren't distinguishing between those that were recognized by the federal government and those that aren't. So our perspective is that they continue to owe duties to all tribes in California. But beyond that, I think everything around climate change, as you mentioned, he's really been quite stagnant or outright opposed to a lot of important efforts to end extractive industries in California. So I think there's much that he can do better on, and related to both tribes in California and climate justice work.
Angela, how does your organization center storytelling and narrative in your work? Because as we were saying earlier, the cultural work is so important. You know, the major narrative platforms in this country include Hollywood, which is not far from where you and I are, and of course the major media, the mainstream media. And it seems as though both have done a not just not a good enough job, but actively played a destructive role in narratives around Indigenous peoples, right? And so, what are some of the ways in which your organization's taking back the narratives, creating your own?
Thanks for asking that question. I'm so proud of our Indigenous media team. They are amazing. They do amazing work. They're a team of four, and they developed their own set of Indigenous media protocols. So the way that we make media and films is a little bit different than mainstream, for sure. We make sure that any footage we record and any interviews we do, that we get those folks copies, digital copies, and actual hard copies of those interviews after we record them. And that's because, as you mentioned, so much of the narrative out there is not our own and has not been created by us. And so we recognize that, when we're asking something from folks, especially Indigenous folks who have had so much extracted from us over the centuries, it's really important that we be reciprocal in the way that we move. The final piece is, once the film is completed, which we just had the world premiere for our first feature-length documentary, Our Waterways, a California Tribal Story, that was premiered at the Autry earlier this year in August. And so the final piece of what the Indigenous media protocols are is that we make sure when our films are completed, whenever there's an opportunity for us to screen that included in that is space and time for people actually, featured in the film to also be included and directly, represent themselves on those panels. And all of that is because we're not creating media just for the sake of creating media. We're doing it to be supportive of and responsive to the needs identified directly by these Indigenous communities.
And so it's documentary films that your organization creates, and you said had your first feature length documentary, and And are there other social media platforms that you use to get the word out, and even just other sort of non-digital forms of cultural work?
Yeah, well, we also have several short films. Some of them are documentary and others are not. So we do a little bit of both. Those are all available on our website, which is sacredplacesinstitute.org. And we do have, I have to confess, I'm a bit of a Luddite. I don't have Facebook or Instagram. I've never been on TikTok. So that's out of my realm, but we do have a director of communications and she's great with our social media. So we have a LinkedIn and an Instagram, and we, in those spaces try to uplift not only the work that we're doing, but, be really responsive to the requests from our allies and our relatives as well, and amplify those messages there.
And,
Um,
mhm.
and in terms of non-digital forms of cultural work, many of the folks that work at SPI are also cultural practitioners. And so, they bring that with them in all of the work they do. So I think at some level, everything that we do in person is cultural work. We just did a 3-day gathering in my homelands, in shared Ahashima and Tonga homelands in Irvine, California last week, called Land Forward. And the first day was just for tribes and tribal entities that have some form of land back. And then the second and third day were for tribal and non-tribal folks who were working on land conservation and land back issues. And one of the conversations that we had there was about the abolition movement, and how once prisons are eliminated, then how can that land be rehabilitated and then rematriated to tribal nations? And so
I love
that
that.
to me feels like yeah, really important cultural work that
Yeah.
we were able to do that in the heart of Orange County in this particular climate. So I think every time we show up in person, that's cultural work.
Right. And so what you were just describing just sounds like the kind of long term vision for people to aspire to, right? Because we often think about responding to the moment, responding defensively to the attacks around us, but to have a North Star, to have a vision to work toward, to be also in concert with movements that complement, such as the abolition movement. I think that's just a wonderful way forward, and that leads me to the next question, which is where does your organization fit within the landscape of other social justice movements? Who do you see as your natural allies?
I mean, I think anyone fighting for justice for people and land and water and place and all our human and non-human relatives. I as an indigenous person with most, well, a few things, so many things to say there. One, the reason that I included the word institute in the title of our organization is because I wanted to create something that helped us as indigenous organizers reclaim our strategic vision and focus on this concept of 7 generations from now. The reason that California is, heavily written about as this paradise on earth by the conquistadors and early non-California indigenous folks who came here is because my ancestors and the ancestors of other California indigenous people really understood ecosystems and understood these concepts like sustainability. For most indigenous peoples, part of our, including my own nation, my own Hashimon culture, part of what we are, we're put here on this earth to care for a particular place. That's pretty much embedded in all of our creation stories. And so, I asked myself a lot, what does it mean to have a mandate from the creator to care for everything and everyone of a particular place, which for me now happens to be Orange County, right? the place where after September 11th had the largest number of Islamophobic hate crimes in the nation, the place where after the first election of Trump had the most racist tweets west of the Mississippi in the country. And the list can go on and on in terms of the settler colonial violence that's manifested in many ways in my homelands. And so for me, if I take seriously this notion that I, as an Ahashiman person, have a responsibility to this place, it means that I have a responsibility to fight Islamophobia, to fight anti-Blackness, to center not just my people, but all oppressed peoples who are in my homelands today. And it means also that I have a responsibility to not just fight against, but dream for something better than these extractive industries and capitalist concepts that have created and continue to expand brutal inequities amongst people and place.
Angela, finally, give out a website for Sacred Places Institute for Indigenous Peoples. Where can people find out about the work you do and support it?
Yes, our website is sacredplacesinstitute.org, and we do have an Instagram and a LinkedIn and I think a Facebook for social media. So check us out on our website for sure. You can check out our different media projects there and learn more about us and sign up for our newsletter and check us out on social media.
And I'll post a link to your website and other social media as well from our website. Thank you so much, Angela, for joining us today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
My guest has been Angela Mooney Darcy, Executive Director and founder of the Sacred Places Institute for Indigenous Peoples. This is Rising Up for Justice, and I'm Sonali Kolhatkar, host and executive producer of this new weekly half-hour series exclusive to viewers of Free Speech TV and subscribers of my long-standing program Rising Up with Sonali. Find out more at risingupwithsonali.com.